In April of 2020, I retired after 30 years in law enforcement, operating primarily at serious, organised and complex crime level. The last 3 years of my career I spent deployed as head of anti-corruption programmes and projects in Nigeria and West Africa for the UK National Crime Agency. During my career I have managed investigative, intelligence and analytical teams. I hold a master's degree in analysis, intelligence and media, and I also hold an international diploma in AML and CFT. We're going to talk today about the power and the potential of data visualization. In the current law enforcement theatre, our ability to obtain data with which to investigate is quite phenomenal. However, do we always make best use of that data, and do we always present it in a way which will enhance and add value to our investigations? Francis Bacon will tell us that knowledge is power. I will challenge you today to that statement and say knowledge is power, but only if you understand the true potential of the data that you hold and the power that it could possibly present you. Just to get going, I want you to pick a card. Pick any card. In your head, I want you to repeat the name of your card 3 times. And despite international boundaries, I want to show you the power of telekinesis and how I can actually take that card that you have thought of and remove it from this presentation. Did I do that? Was your card picked? Was your card removed? Clearly that's just a parlour trick. The 6 cards I initially offered you were not the 5 cards that I presented you on the last slide. And herein lies the issues with data. At no stage must we use that data to mislead. At no stage must we lie using that data. As law enforcement officers, we must make sure that we work with ethics and with lawfulness in everything we do. Literally, the cards will fall where the cards will fall. Sometimes that data is not going to say what you thought it was going to say. And those are the times when we will have those mature, difficult conversations. I know that I have been on the receiving end of discussions where staff have said to me, what we thought was going to be revealed by this data has not been revealed by this data, and the person we thought was a suspect in actual fact is no longer that suspect. That is the power of data. That is the potential of data. And no visualization will ever take away from the integrity and the way in which we use our data. So ask yourself this question. Are you, your department and your organisation intelligence led? Or are you, your department or your organisation more information pulled? And what I mean by that is we talk about intelligence led quite often in law enforcement circles. We like to think we're intelligence led. Are we actually taking information, intelligence, data? Are we putting that through a logical process, adding value, interpreting it correctly, and being driven by where that data says we should be looking or where we should be finding? Or are we obtaining data, seeing what it says, and then responding to it directly? If it's the latter, then we are definitely more information pulled. If it's the former, then yes, we can truly say we are intelligence led. The problem with being information pulled is that quite often we are misinterpreting or misusing or misunderstanding the potential of that data, and we're responding purely on the basis of what it says, the knee-jerk reaction. Consider this. If you had a spectrum of techniques available to you, And on the left hand side of this axis, the value of that technique is presented to you. And on the bottom line of that axis, the difficulty by which we can actually deliver that particular technique. You would find that there are four key areas within that spectrum. You have descriptive, you have diagnostic, you have predictive, and you have prescriptive. The vast percentage of work that law enforcement and investigators work with is descriptive. The value of descriptive intelligence, the value of descriptive data, descriptive information is valuable. It tells us things. But just imagine if we could work towards diagnostic. Okay, that requires a little bit more effort. That requires a little bit more skill. But the value of working towards a diagnostic, the mechanics, the understanding of a crime, provides us with a greater value. Once we get to diagnostic, that will allow us to go to more predictive policing, more predictive investigation. Again, it's more difficult to do, but the value of what we get back from it increases. And finally, from predictive, we will work towards prescriptive investigations. Prescriptive investigations are difficult to get to, but not too difficult that they can't be done. But the value in what you get back increases exponentially. So descriptive investigation data: what happened, who was there, what was the registration of the car, what was the address, what was the scene like. Very, very descriptive. Very easy to get hold of. We're inundated with that type of information. Diagnostically, the mechanics, the workings out of the modus operandi, who knows who, is the why did it happen, how did it happen, who was part of that process. The predictive element takes us to when will it happen and what will happen if we see that particular sequence of data again. And finally, into the prescriptive: how can we be there when it happens? So we can spend all our time in descriptive and be very, very comfortable, we're very happy, we're very confident in that area. Or we can start to work with our data and go towards diagnostic, predictive and prescriptive. Imagine if I said to you now, there is going to be an armed robbery. Would you rather be at the bank 10 minutes before it happened and arrest everybody as they turn up at the bank robbery? Or would you rather be at the bank robbery 10 minutes after it happened, having to pick up all the pieces and the clues and put the jigsaw together? I know personally where I would rather be. And you will get that through diagnostic, predictive and prescriptive. So descriptive investigations will give us a wealth of data, a wealth of information. Diagnostic investigations, we will still capture that descriptive, we will still capture that information, but we will now have a greater hindsight into how the crime has occurred or how the crime happens. It will also tell us some insight into how that crime might occur in the future, or what that crime might look like in the future, or how this organisation may adapt in the future. Once we have that insight, the predictive element starts to give us foresight. We can start to look ahead. And once we have foresight, we can start optimizing our resources. We can be prescriptive around our resources. So our ability to collect data is quite phenomenal, often generated from a question. However, the first stages of difficulty that we address with obtaining data in investigations is quite often the question that we ask. So let me ask you this question: how fast is Usain Bolt? Now, some of you may answer, well, he's faster than everyone. Some of you may have answered 23.35 miles per hour. Some of you might have said 37.57 kilometers an hour. Some of you might have said 10.44 meters a second. Some of you might have said, well, over the 100-meter sprint, he's 9.58 seconds. Unless one of you said, well, on the 200-meter sprint, he's 19.19 seconds. So that simple question, how fast is Usain Bolt, could actually generate 6 different answers. Perhaps what I was looking for was some form of tabulation that told me all of those things anyway. So whose fault was that? Was that my fault for asking the wrong question, or not being specific enough in my question, or your fault for not clarifying what I actually meant? And quite often it's a mixture of the two. The better our question, the better our understanding of what we want from our data request, the better chance we've got of getting the right data to answer the right questions. So think about refining the question. Can we clarify with the customer, with the requester, what it actually is they're looking for? And let me give you an example. I was recently asked, does Mr. X own a white Mercedes? And using the systems that we had access to, I was able to say, no, Mr. X does not own that vehicle. However, what turned out to be the question that was actually being asked was, does Mr. X have access to any vehicles? Now, using those same systems, we identified that Mr. X, although he didn't own the white Mercedes, he was insured on a white Mercedes. So the answer to that question was, what vehicles does Mr. X have access to? He has access to a white Mercedes. However, answer to the question, does Mr. X own a white Mercedes? The answer would be, no, he doesn't own a white Mercedes. So we need to clarify. And we get that clarification by finding out some elements of the investigation, find out what the customer, what the requester is actually seeking to achieve from this data. What will an answer look like? Sometimes we may have to widen that question. Perhaps we're too specific. So do we need to widen that question slightly? And how wide do we go, and how much control do we provide by widening it, or how much control do we lose by widening it? And then we can obviously go to focus as well. Is the question far too wide? Do we need to focus it? So I would ask you to consider, whenever asking for data to support your investigations, particularly around financial data, think about clarifying the question: why, who, what, etc. The 5 WH, the who, the where, the why, the when, the how. Think about perhaps widening that question, and think about focusing that question. The key thing here is, when we're applying for financial data, apply for what you need, but be sure that you are going to use what you get, whether that's positively or negatively. So let's look at refining the question then. How fast is Usain Bolt compared to other land animals? Well, now we've got a much better question. How fast is Usain Bolt compared to other land animals? So we can actually apply for that data now, and we can actually respond with that data. And using some decent visualization, we can make our response actually quite interesting. So here we are, how Usain Bolt compares to other land animals. And we can produce, if necessary, a jazzy schematic which will show that. Does that answer the customer's question? They will tell us, I'm sure. But compared to the previous question, how fast is Usain Bolt, this one is far more specific, and our visualization of the answer can be more specific as well. So data collection and data use are key things, key elements within any investigation. In the current law enforcement environment internationally, we're seeing this type of process taking over investigations. Our ability to collect data, then we collate it onto some form of collation system. We then translate that data, we then represent that data, and then we ask ourselves the question, do we need this data? And what I mean by data translation is quite often, for example, if we're looking at financial records, people who are not necessarily au fait with financial records We will translate that data to tell them the date, the time, the bank's transfer from bank A to bank B, the amount of money. We're not actually telling them anything they don't already know. We're not actually telling them anything that they couldn't actually work out for themselves. So we have to ask ourselves, how much investigation, how much analysis are we going into when we're processing that data? But more importantly, at the end of that process, we are asking ourselves the question, do we need this data? Is this data important to us? So I would ask you to consider a different model. At the start of that process, placing data need at the very start. Do we need this data? What data do we need? What period of data do we need? In what format do we need this data? Which banks do we need this data? So we're addressing the data need at the very start. What is the purpose of us applying for this data? What are we trying to achieve? Then we will data collect, then we will data collate, then we will data analyze. We will put that through a process where we will deconstruct that data into its constituent parts for the purposes of individual investigation. Or we will reconstruct those individual parts to work out and investigate how or if it makes up the whole that we are trying to investigate. And once we have that final product from that analysis, we can then comprehend how that product fits within our investigation, how it impacts in our investigation, whether that's positively or negatively. And then we can visualize that for the person that we are trying to influence or inform. So data science, data, financial crime investigation. Let's look at just how some of these things can complicate things. So in science, science is underpinned by deductive reasoning. Deduction being to the facts, that is, it's as it is. Yeah, 1 + 1 = 2. It's a deductive fact. Science is principally charged with finding empirical truths. Crime investigation, particularly financial crime investigation, maintains momentum by using inductive reasoning. So yes, we've been told that Mr. X is a money launderer, and we've been told that Mr. X uses his business to move money from A account to B account. Now, moving the money from A account to B account can be deductive. The data that we get back from the bank will say money moved from A to B account. Therefore, there is an element of deduction within our data interpretation. However, the inductive aspect is being able to say that we believe that that is money laundering as opposed to a legitimate purpose or legitimate reason. So we maintain the momentum by putting in that inductive reasoning, going beyond the facts. So crime investigation is principally charged with proving beyond all reasonable doubt, not to a scientific 100% empirical level. So don't lose sight of the fact that we are adding, on many, many occasions, our interpretation of a reasonable rationale to support the argument that Mr. X is a money launderer. So, does data assist in proof, not necessarily truth? That's a question for ethics on another day. So let's just look at the scientific approach then. So I have a pile of coal. Let's say there's 100 kilos of coal. I have a shovel, I have a spade, and that spade is capable of carrying 5 kilos with every scoop. I know that there's 20 yards between A and B, that I want to move that pile of coal. And I know that it takes me 20 seconds to move from point A to point B with 5 kilos of coal on my shovel. So scientifically, we can put that process and we can put that equation into the system, and it will effectively tell us that over X amount of time we will be able to move a pile of coal, because it will take it empirically time, distance, amount, deduction. However, we know that that's not always the case. We know that in the real world, you will be tired. Sometimes you'll have 4 kilos on that shovel. Sometimes you might even have 2 kilos on that shovel. Sometimes as you're moving, some coal will fall off. You've got to get from A to B and then B back to A to get the next scoop. So we know in reality, that time will extend. You'll get tired. Things will happen. And it's that inductive reasoning to be able to explain why we think it will probably take 25% longer than the science tells us, or 50% longer than the science tells us, is the inductive reasoning aspect. So again, when we're looking at financial investigation, although we're told that X has moved money from bank account A to bank account B, that is an empirical fact. The fact that we believe that to be money laundering, placement, layering, or integration, that is the inductiveness of that investigation. And let's be mindful as well of cause versus correlation. Something has happened because something else was in play. We also need to be very, very careful that we don't confuse or we don't mislead the cause versus the correlation. So, for example, the number of people who have drowned by falling into a swimming pool correlates with the number of films Nicolas Cage has appeared in. So we have two sets of data, the red data and the black data. The red data is swimming pool drownings, and the black data are films that Nicolas Cage has been in. And if you overlay those two data sets, you can start to see that there is a correlation. Is it a true correlation? Well, of course it's not. They are two disparate sets of data. Coincidence maybe, but not a correlation. The causes are completely separate from their correlation. And we need to be careful of this, and we need to be wise of this with bringing bias into any of our investigations. On day one of the investigation, we are told that Mr. X is our subject one and that Mr. X is up to no good money laundering. And we carry that bias through into our investigations. So yes, when we get that data back and it shows money being moved from bank account A to bank account B, our correlation straight away is that is money laundering, because that is what we've been told. Just as another example, if you look at the per capita consumption of mozzarella cheese in the US and you look at the civil engineering doctorates that have been awarded in the US during the same period of time, you can see that there is a correlation there. The point here being is that most things in life we can make two data sets actually fit. That doesn't necessarily mean that there is a correlation, a true correlation in there. And then this pulls us back into ethical investigation. So let's look at some of the components of data visualization. We're looking at the representation and presentation of data to facilitate understanding, because ultimately that is what it boils down to. We will get all this data, we will get all this investigation, we will meld the two together, and at some point we are going to try and convince either the decision maker or the jury as to what we think actually happened. So let's look at the power of data visualization. As we said, from collection to presentation, all data is subjected to bias. It's a matter for you to address that. All I will say on that subject is, as I said before, just be mindful. Just because you've been told that Mr. X is a money launderer does not necessarily mean that Mr. X is actually a money launderer. He may well be moving money for an organised crime group. He may well be moving their money from A to B. He may well be charging 7% commission. But at no stage is he actually aware that that money is tainted or that money has come from crime. So just ask yourself that question. Am I actually presenting what is here, or am I presenting what I would like to be here? So there's great power in data, and there's even greater power in well-presented data. All data collected during that investigation is a representation of a complex system. So it will always be an abstraction to some extent from the activities that are going on. So yes, we are seeing millions of pounds moved from a bank account in Nigeria to a bank account in the Seychelles to a bank account in London. The data, the banking data, becomes an abstraction, from the integrity of the investigation. Where is our evidence of knowledge? Where is our evidence that the person suspected or knew? So we must always go back to the data, we must always go back to our evidence, and we must correlate the cause and the correlation between the data, the activity, and the evidence. While we're on that subject, just think about the collected data. I've seen this recently quite a few times now. When we get data, for example, it comes back to us in some form of spreadsheet, some Excel spreadsheet or similar. Sometimes it's structured, sometimes it's unstructured, particularly unstructured data, but the analysts may well find that they don't like it presented in the way it's been presented. So they will manipulate the Excel spreadsheet in order to realign the columns, etc., to suit the way in which they want to read that data. Just be mindful of that word manipulation. What does the word manipulation mean to you? Certainly in the UK, manipulation suggests some form of change, some form of added or taken away that shouldn't be there. It's a small world, it's a small word, but I would just ask you to think about using this phrase instead, where we reformat or we format the data. Just taking away that ability for the defence perhaps to jump on the fact that we've manipulated the data. We haven't changed it from what it was, we have just reformatted it. We've just moved column A to column B and column B to column A. We still have the gold copy if anybody ever wants to come and look at that. So think about our stages of understanding. We've applied for some data. We've applied to the bank for some banking data because we believe that the subject that we are investigating is moving dirty money from bank account A to bank account B and C. So we've applied for that data, and so we should. However, we've got that data back now. What is our initial perception of that data? And this is the first stage of 3 in our stages of understanding with data. We get that data back. What does the perception give us of that data? Do we see money moving from account A to account B or account C? We may well see that, in which case that will give us some confidence that what we were expecting to see has been seen. I would also ask you, what is your perception if you saw bank account A moving money to bank account Z and bank account Y? How does that change? How does that change your investigation? So our first perception is, what does it show? Where is big? Where is medium? Where is small? How do things compare to what we've been told or what we already know? What relationships exist? Were we aware of that relationship? Is that a new relationship? So perception, it comes in, the data comes in, and our initial perception is either there is something wrong with this picture or this is the picture that we were expecting. The next stage then is our interpretation of that data. What does it mean? What is good or what is bad within that data? Is it meaningful what has happened or insignificant? Is it unusual or was it expected? And our interpretation may well be that that is an unusual process. Why have they gone A, B, C when they could have gone A to C and missed B out? Is that unusual or is that expected? So our interpretation now is perhaps leading us more to, yes, there is something right with this picture. Yes, this does start to formulate our suspicions that it's money laundering, which will take us on to the third stage of understanding, the comprehension of the data. So in interpretation, what does it mean? With comprehension, what does it mean to me though? What does it mean to this investigation? What are the main messages that are coming out from this data? What have I learnt from this data that impacts on my investigation? What actions do I need to take in relation to this data that will assist me in my investigation? So the 3 stages of understanding will be perception, interpretation, and then comprehension. Some of the dangers that we get, or some of the issues that we get with visualization of data, is that we only work off perception. We were expecting to see money moving from A to B. Therefore, when we see money moving from A to B, our bias kicks in that that must be money laundering, and our visualization of that data is based on our perception, not on the interpretation and not on the comprehension. Having done those 3 stages of understanding and we're happy with the product that we've got at the end of it, we then want to visualize in order to assist in the understanding of what's gone on there. And there are 3 key principles I would ask you to think about in visualization. Good data visualization is trustworthy. This comes back to the integrity of our data. This comes back to the 6-card trick we showed you at the start of this presentation. Is the data that I am relying on trustworthy? I've reformatted that data, I've rejigged that data to show various elements that are relevant to this investigation. Is there an audit that anybody could go backwards and go back to the original gold copy? Therefore, is my data trustworthy? The minute that question comes with a not sure or no is the time when visualization of data starts to go out the window. We start to go from salesman to conman. So principle 1, good data visualization sits with trustworthy data. Principle 2, good data visualization is accessible. Again, we're playing with an open hand. If the defence want to repeat my process, by all means repeat my process. Here is the process that I went through. Here is my audit. If you do that audit, you will come up with the same answer. And principle 3, good data visualization is elegant. And what I mean by that is not necessarily that the chart should be sponsored by Dolce & Gabbana, but that the chart should be elegant in the way it's presented. It should assist the reader or the jury member to clearly see what you're trying to portray in the trial. Whether it's a report, it's smooth, it's clear, it flows. So there's an elegance to your reporting. So 3 key stages of understanding and 3 key principles of good data visualization. Trustworthy, accessible, and that the product that you produce is an elegant product. So think about data representation. The act of converting data into something more easily understood is data representation. Not misleading, not misrepresenting. Data representation is the act of converting the data we have received into something more easily understood. The choices of presentation are all decisions concerned with determining the design and the visualization anatomy. You will have to consider several factors when you are presenting and visualizing your data to either your manager or to the jury or to the prosecution team. So you need to look at that anatomy. Let me ask you a question. What would you do if one of the members of your jury was colourblind? I suspect that you will be presenting charts and reports to the prosecution for them to present in court with various colours and indicators on there. But if one of the members or 2 of the members of that jury are colourblind, they are not going to get the benefit and the potential of that visualisation. Therefore, you may have to present that in a black and white or a grayscale format. So ask yourself that question. What happens to the potential and the power of my data visualization? So you need to consider things like the chart type. Are you going to have any form of interactivity? What about annotations? Are they clear and understandable? Obviously, we've mentioned colour usage and also the composition. Is it going to be a complex chart? Is it going to be a simple chart? Colour usage, again, is an interesting one. I have had numerous times in my career where I've been challenged for using a red indicator, a red line or a red link towards the suspect. And you could argue, correctly so, the defence have argued that they don't want that red line in there because that suggests that their client is already guilty. So we've changed that. But there are only so many colours in the palette of some of the software that we use. So we stop using red and we start using green, or we start using the purple. It's only a matter of time before purple becomes that key colour and that key argument in trial. So just because we use a particular colour, for example red, doesn't necessarily mean that that's a bad thing and we shouldn't be doing it. This is about negotiation with the prosecution and just highlighting various things. What ifs? Should we use red? What if we have somebody who's colourblind? How will that affect the chart? Do we need to do the chart in a different way? So these are all just little things that you might want to consider. So let's look at visualization and representation then. So we've applied for data. We're looking at an individual who we believe has been involved in organised crime, and we're looking at some sort of proceeds of crime offence against them. From an initial investigation perspective or an internal briefings perspective, this chart might be ideal. It gives us all his monthly transactions, his incoming, his outgoings, the last 12 months, projected retirement savings, etc., etc. However, if we were to present this in trial, if we were to present this to a jury, I suspect that we may well present this in bite-sized chunks. This might actually be 6 different charts, because we would absolutely overwhelm the jury if we presented this to them. So again, on the one hand, from an intelligence preparation perspective, investigation perspective, this chart may well be the ideal way to get across the interpretation and comprehension of the data we've received. However, in front of a jury, we may want to consider exactly how we're going to present that. And again, a chart like this, yet tick box, crosses, nice and clear, that has a power in itself. But again, is this something that you would want to present to the jury? This is something possibly that you would use more on a personal basis. Things that you have done that are still to be done, things that are in process of being done. And again, we might be looking at the movement of money between a particular business, and the argument is that the business is not doing very well, or the business is doing very well. And we're looking at how much that they planned when they told the bank, when they set up their account with the bank, and how much business they've actually pulled in. Now, if we were to present this to a jury of financial professionals, then again, this may well be a perfect chart to deliver. However, if you're presenting this to 12 people in the jury who have very limited financial experience, then again, this may well be overwhelming. So we might be looking at bite-sized chunks from this single chart. And again, here's a classic one. If we were to approach a forensic accountant, this might be the perfect chart that they would be looking for. And we've got all that data, we've converted that data, and we've given them a very powerful chart that explains X, Y, and Z. However, would we want to present this to a jury? I suspect not. But then again, we might want to present something like this. If we're talking about billions of pounds, we might want to talk about some sort of bubble chart where the more money is in the point that's being made, the bigger the bubble or the bigger the circle. So again, we might want to present this to a jury in a very simplistic way to explain the story of the investigation that we're going to go down. In reality, we're probably going to look at things far, far more simple. So for example, if you're looking at the sales of a particular company, and you've got a guy who's done 20%, 24%, 27%, 19%, but your 3 suspects who've done 4, 3 and 3% worth of sales actually have the largest amounts of money going through their bank accounts. That might well be a very, very simple way to show the corruption that's been undertaken by 3 of those salespeople. Why are they doing by far the least amount of business, yet they have the highest salaries and the highest commissions going through their bank accounts? And something like a pie chart, as simple as it is, could get that point across very, very, very easily. You might want to look at something like a histogram. So a histogram is basically telling you your data over time, when the most common times are for an individual action to occur. So this is in relation to call center calls. So we can see that where the highest amount of peak is there, that will look at number of minutes on hold, that number of customers willing to wait. We can very, very quickly and easily see exactly where that data correlates to the issue in hand. Or you might have something as simple as looking at the annual salary of men and women across various universities and schools. And again, a lot of data, a lot of colleges, a lot of money involved, but quite simply, just using dots, you can quickly see the difference between the men's salary and the women's salary. And again, here is a good example. In relation to this, why was pink chosen for the ladies and why was blue chosen for the men? Or if you were buying a house in San Francisco, perhaps, where would you buy your house? The red areas are the highest crime, and the green areas, the light green areas, are the lowest crime. So again, you can very, very quickly see, even though there's a lot of complexity that makes up that red, so there are 338 crimes in one particular area, 268 crimes in another particular area, it's not necessary for you to know those individual crimes. What is necessary is to know that those individual crimes create that hotspot in that area. Therefore, if you were looking to buy a house, you might well look towards Mission Rock on the right hand side with only 8 crimes. It's a clear, powerful visualization of crime in that city over the period of time that you were looking for. In reality, we're probably going to be looking at something like this in relation to crime investigations, where perhaps we are looking at an organised crime group, let's say selling drugs. How is the money collected from the sales of those drugs, and how does that money work its way through to our key subject, Barbara Fabian? And again, we're going to collect data from banks, and the bank data is going to show us the movements of money, eventually all going to Linda Brightman, and then all going through to Rupert Ward. So does that answer the question? Yes, it does. Therefore, our acquisition, our collection of that data was meaningful, and we had a purpose at the end of it. Perhaps we want to show something more complex. Perhaps we want to show a sequence of events with some key events and the movements of perhaps a commodity like a boat or a house. Again, slightly more complex, but if it's presented in the right way, this may well be a good way to get 4 or 5 different data sets that would normally overlap and be completely baffling, and we can simplify some of the key components of those data sets and pick out those key components to explain to the decision maker or to the jury exactly the sequence of events that occurred as a consequence of the movement of cash or the movement through these banks. Notwithstanding the fact that we may go really old school, and good old-fashioned Excel spreadsheet still has a place. So a simple spreadsheet where we've overlaid, in this case, 2 data sets. One data set is surveillance that has occurred on an individual or individuals, and the second data set is communications data between the individuals we believe are using those particular mobile telephone numbers. And then we colour code those mobile telephone numbers. So Mr. Mughal is the orangey coloured phone, Mr. Hussain was the blue coloured phone, Mr. Latif was the light green phone. We can then overlay those 2 data sets to show the interaction between surveillance and phone calls being made as the surveillance is ongoing. And it now gives us some comprehension as to why certain things happen during that surveillance, and the interpretation of those telephone calls in relation to that comprehension is that these are calls instructing people where to go or instructing people what to do. So you build up the conspiracy. And we clearly have the date, the time, the action that has occurred, and also the provenance, the source of that information, whether it's the download of a mobile phone, whether it's the itemized billing of a mobile phone, or whether it's a statement of a surveillance officer. But it becomes a very powerful storyboard with which to present, particularly to a jury, and it assists them in understanding what would otherwise be a very, very complex sequence of events. So we want to render the complex simple through our data acquisition. We want to tell customers, the jury, the decision maker, what they need to know. We want to provide persuasive assessment and persuasive arguments, and we want to provide meaningful analysis from the bulk data that we've collected. We also want to provide accurate, well-informed assessment, and those assessments we want to be able to make actionable. As a consequence of us applying for data, we want to be able to do something with that data that is going to be beneficial to the investigation. So we need to look at meaningful judgments, effortless comprehension on the part of the reader, the jury member, the decision maker, and particularly in a proactive investigation, future looking. As a consequence of what we've done, this is what we could be doing tomorrow. So let's just think about how we're going to present that and the power of what we've got to be presented. And I'd ask you to think about an acronym called AIMS. A stands for your audience. Consider who your audience is. Have you got the right people? Are you presenting the right product to the right people? I stands for issue. What is the issue that you're actually trying to address? Again, one of the key things I have seen in my career in terms of a person being presented to is that I have asked for a presentation or I have asked for a discussion around a particular thing. And when I get the presentation, there is 45 minutes of presentation and only 3 or 4 minutes are actually the thing that I was interested in. So have you got an issue and are you clear what it is, what the issue is that you're trying to present towards? What is the message? So yes, by all means tell me that this is an investigation into money laundering. But what I want to hear from you is that as a consequence of you getting that data, you're able to show or able to say that it's highly likely that this movement of money was money laundering. Again, think about just repeating what we already know. So I will certainly on a number of occasions be told by the person doing the presenting the exact thing that I already know. Here is the data belonging to Mr. X. The data shows that money has moved from bank account A to bank account B. Okay, I know that already. So what's the message you're trying to tell me? Well, I'm trying to tell you that he's money laundering. Okay, so that's the message. Not the data isn't the message. The message is the comprehension of what that means. And finally, the storyline. Try and put the message, try and put the issue, try and present to your audience some sort of storyline that helps you carry the purpose of acquiring that data in the first place. So when we're presenting, I will always ask my staff to consider this. If you're going to tell me something, that is the what. There should always then be a so what. And then there should be a now what. Again, quite often I'm told a what, and when I ask so what, there is no answer. And when I ask now what, there is no answer. So the power and potential of data visualization and data presentation is to tell the requested, the audience, what you're trying to say, what that means, and what you're going to do about it. To help you do that, think about ensuring that within that presentation or that report, you are clearly laying out your findings, your judgments that you are making, and the recommendations that come with that. Have you put important information in that presentation or that report? Again, certainly things around threat and risk are often missed out. I need to know as a decision maker, if you're telling me what you've acquired in terms of this data and you're trying to tell me what it means, I also want to know important information. Whether you might think it's not that important or not, I as the decision maker need to know about important information, particularly around threat and risk. Context. Have you put the data into context with the bigger investigation? Think about using vigorous and active voice. If you don't believe it, if you don't sell it, why should I buy it? So I'm not saying that we should do everything through the power of light and dance or expressive dance, but we should equally believe in the product that we're trying to sell, whether that's to the jury or to a manager or a decision maker. So let's be vigorous in the way in which we sell it, and let's also be active, use active voice. And what I mean by active voice is, consider this. The telephone number might be being used by Paddy Kerr. Paddy Kerr is using this telephone number. In the first example, that is passive voice. The telephone may be being used by Paddy Kerr. Whereas active voice would be Paddy Kerr is the user. Paddy Kerr could be the user. Paddy Kerr may be the user of telephone XYZ. So can we be active in our delivery? Think about ABC, which is accuracy, brevity, and clarity. And also think about bluff, the bold line up front. What we will see, certainly these days in law enforcement, is managers are very, very busy and they don't seem to have time, even though they've asked for these things, to actually read these reports when they come back. Therefore, we will look to put the bold line up front, the conclusions up front. You will frequently hear, can you put that on an A4 piece of paper for me? Can you give me a bullet pointed memo on your report? My advice to you here is do bluff. So your bold line up front, your conclusions up front. But if you've done a 60-page report or a 10-page report, add the 10-page report still. And then add your conclusions again at the end of your 10-page report. So what your decision maker gets is a report that has the conclusions or the synopsis at the front. It has the content that got you to those, the findings and the judgments that you've made. And it then repeats the bold line up front again at the end. The advantage of that is, if the decision is good, who cares? If the decision is bad, however, the first thing people will come back will be to say, well, what were you told? And the manager could turn around and say, well, I was only ever given bullet points. If you've actually given the manager the whole report, even if you've put the bullet points up front first, what more could you have done? So, think about the what. Paddy Kerr, subject of interest, the Legion of Doom. So what? Intelligence indicates that Paddy Kerr is receiving large amounts of cash, deposits from various sources which are suspected to be derived from illicit funds. He's using these funds to support organised crime activity within Gotham City. I can tell you now that that statement has been derived from the intelligence. You've told the decision maker or the manager nothing more than they would have read from the intelligence reports to start with. It's very passive, it's not very vigorous, there is no or little added value to the report. Consider this then. What? Paddy Kerr threatens Gotham City. It's now vigorous, it's now active voice. Paddy Kerr, leader of the Ultraviolet Legion of Doom, the principal gang in Gotham, has the funds, the manpower and the unified leadership necessary to mount a serious disruption in the stability of Gotham's neighbourhoods. So that's perception, interpretation and comprehension of the intelligence and data now. We've now got our findings, we've now got our judgments, and our recommendations will be the now what. We should do X, we should do Y, we should do Z. So there you have it. What, so what, and then we can have the now what. All done in vigorous, active voice. Also, think about fact versus judgment. The Sopranos Motorcycle Club membership has expanded in the last 5 years. We've received data that showed 5 years ago there were 10 members of the club. 2 years ago there were 30 members of the club. This year there are now 100 members of the club. Therefore, the Sopranos Motorcycle Club membership has expanded in the last 5 years. It is scientific, it is empirical, it is deductive, it is a fact. However, growing membership in the Sopranos Motorcycle Club in the last 5 years has led to increases in methamphetamine and marijuana trafficking and property crimes in Toronto, Calgary and Montreal. We are now going beyond the facts. We're now going beyond the data that we know to be empirically true. And we are now adding our own interpretation, our own comprehension to what that data means based on other data sets that we've been given. This now becomes our judgment. This now becomes our inductive inference. So also consider things like briefing up and potentially briefing down. Briefing down is often after the decisions have been made, and this is about imparting knowledge on the team. So I'm more concerned at this stage with briefing up. When we're briefing up to a decision maker or a manager, consider this as a model, SAFCON. In your report or in your presentation, you're going to use this as a model, and you can change the titles to suit whatever you would prefer, but just think of this as a model. The situation, the aims, the factors which affect you achieving those aims, the choices that are available, the option from that choice that you would prefer if you were the decision maker, and the method by which you would monitor the success of that option should it be carried out. The important thing here is that you are not the decision maker, the manager is, but you're telling the manager the story, you're telling them what you're trying to achieve, you're telling the manager the challenges that you face, you're giving the manager choices and options that are available, you're giving him an option that you would prefer that they might want to consider above all the others, but ultimately it's their decision, it's their choice. But what about if you're just having a meeting with your team, weekly meeting, monthly meeting? You may not want to go to the extent of something so structured. So think about an information briefing. Think about something like bingo. Background, the intelligence or the information, the nominals, the people involved, the gaps that you currently have, and the options or opportunities that those gaps pose or need deciding upon. And that's just a brief bingo briefing. So try to make the complex simple. Think about qualitative statements, particularly in the UK now. All police forces and agencies have signed up to the probability yardstick. Yeah, the probability, the qualitative statement. So almost certain, 90%, highly unlikely, the 10%, probable or likely, 55 to 70% chance of it being true. And let's bin the bits that don't matter. Let's bin the bits that are not relevant to this presentation. Yes, we're very, very clever. Yes, we've done a lot of work in relation to this investigation. However, for the purpose of this presentation, we don't need to know about A, B, C and D. However, we are going to focus on X, Y and Z. If you want to know about A, B, C and D, come and speak to us afterwards, or we could do a presentation on them on another day. But we're not going to overload you with everything today. So, how are we going to say it? Particularly around presentations, but equally important in a report, you're going to tell them what we are going to tell them. We will then tell them. And then we will tell them what we have told them. So as a model, we will tell them what we're going to tell them, we will tell them, and then we will tell them what we have told them. That ensures that they get the message. We're going to think about ABC, accuracy, brevity and clarity. We're going to think about bold line up front. We're going to make sure that our reports and our presentations are clear, what our findings, what our judgments and what our recommendations. and our visualization will be trustworthy, it will be accessible, and it will be elegant. So, precision writing aspiration: to deliver the right product to the right consumer with the right information in the right format at the right time, producing a professional and credible product with sound analytical reasoning and structured in the required style. Thank you very much for listening to me. Best of luck on the 12 programme. Best of luck in your investigation careers, and just be aware of the power and potential of data visualization. Thank you very much.